For many of us still figuring out our place in the world of business analysis, we get confused when we are told a business analyst writes requirements, but then we're also told we write use cases, user stories, business rules, process documents, functional requirements, and so forth. So to help put it all together, I think the best way to describe the whole process is a business analyst has to understand the business, understand where the business wants to go, and finally what needs to change in order to get them there. The business is the first thing you need to understand as a business analyst. Shocking. The first task is to analyze the business before you determine any needs. This analysis should be about how the business runs and should remain separate from the tools used to run it. In most cases, your project will be to determine which features or capabilities best fulfill the business needs, and you have to understand the business to do this well. This is typically done by creating and documenting business processes and business rules, which are sometimes embedded directly into the process itself. The business process, if done well, will be a set of sequential tasks that will be performed, that when they are performed, they achieve value for the business. Simple example, receive an order, process the order, ship the product, generate an invoice. In real life, each of those probably has many steps, but we got to keep it simple so I can keep it short. The business rules usually relate to the individual tasks and help guide decision points in the process. Some examples of business rules. So if we look at the task of processing an order, a rule might be an order must have a valid purchase order number, or an order must have an amount greater than X, or an order with an amount greater than X must go through approvals. The business process and rules should be understood and probably documented before any type of project requirements are developed, and the requirements should take into consideration the process and rules of the business. Next is understanding where it is the business wants to go. Depending on the situation, you might be getting a huge business initiative, like integrating all of the process of a different company that you just acquired, or it might be a new high-level feature or capability, like being able to accept payments at the time of order instead of after the order gets invoiced. At this point, you need to understand why this is being done. Sometimes it's already spelled out for you. Other times it'll be up to you to dig a little deeper and understand what it is that they hope to accomplish with the initiative. This is probably one of the most critical roles of a business analyst because it'll keep everyone focused on delivering things that actually add value. And in the future, when you're talking about scope, it'll help you prioritize features. Last but not least, the requirements themselves. You need to understand that a requirement is really just a generic way of saying a required capability. If we're talking about waterfall documentation, business requirements are the highest level and represent enterprise needs. And in Agile Scrum, it might start out as an epic or a feature if you're using SAFe or scaled Agile framework. In my example, the business requirement or feature would have been the ability to pay at the time of order. Next, you need to determine what stakeholders will need to be able to meet those business needs. So you develop stakeholder requirements or user stories if you're working in an Agile environment. These capabilities tend to revolve around a specific stakeholder. For my payments project example, stakeholders were the business administrators who needed to set up all the pieces to ensure payments were processed accurately, and of course the customers who would need to be able to actually submit the payment up front. You can write these types of requirements as user stories, use cases, or stakeholder requirements. Some example stakeholder requirements for the administrator role might be the ability to set up payment methods for the customer by the country that they might be in, the ability to set up maybe maximum or minimum limits on payments, or the ability to set special pricing based on contracts with the customer. For the customer, a little bit more straightforward, it might be things like the ability to input credit card or ACH details, or the ability to save and reuse payment details. Then, after you understand what the stakeholders need to accomplish, those needs get broken down into more specific solution capabilities or solution requirements, which are literally what the systems needs to be able to do. These can be functional, like validating credit cards with third-party payment processing. They can be interface related, like auto-populating fields or enforcing input types, or non-functional, like payment data must be transferred via encrypted pathways. Depending on where you are, how these things are termed might be different. They can be functional requirements. They might exist in the acceptance criteria of a user story. They might exist in the definition of done, or they might be organized as separate non-functional requirements. Last but not least is deployment. Sometimes in order to get a system set up and running, you need to do a few things in order to manage the transition. The easiest example of this is when migrating into a new system. You might need to build the capability to import masses of data into the new system from the old system. However, once this mass migration is done, the capability to do so is basically obsolete because now you have all the data. This is a transition requirement. It can technically fall into any of the above requirement types. The only difference is that it's temporary. Depending on how your organization works, deployment requirements might just become deployment tasks that exist outside the requirements document or user stories. So, just to recap, as a business analyst, your job is to be able to analytically comprehend a business and its processes and rules so that when it has new initiatives or projects, you can effectively elicit and document the required capabilities to meet the goals of the initiative with business requirements and features that break down into stakeholder requirements or user stories down to functional requirements, acceptance criteria, non-functional requirements, and sometimes transition requirements. I hope that helped. If you have any specific questions about what I talked about or about business analysis in general, leave them in the comments. I'll answer you there. Or if I think it merits a bigger discussion, I'll create a new video addressing your questions directly. So as usual, subscribe so you can see those videos get posted. And thanks for watching.